We begin with a Fox News alert. President Trump is taking on former CIA Director John Brennan amid new fallout over the president revoking Brennan's security clearance. And now a new report. The White House may go farther, reportedly drafting more security clearance cancellations for other current and former intelligence and Justice Department officials. It is on. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, Melissa Francis, Town Hall editor and Fox News contributor Katie Pavlich, host of Kennedy on the Fox Business Network, Kennedy. And in the center seat today, Charles Payne, the host of Making Money with Charles Payne, also making sense, I like to say. Weeknights on the Fox Business Network, he's outnumbered. Good to see you.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Now, what are the, just real quickly, cufflinks today?
Yeah, these are from a Russian artist. They're Beatles submerged in...
Wow.
In
amber.
In amber, yeah.
Right, they just got stuck there, and then they put them on your wrist.
There's your collusion right there. There's a lot, Charles.
Ooh, okay, happy
we like
Monday,
to start it
everybody.
early.
Yeah, happy Monday. The president is responding after John Brennan went after him over the weekend over the security clearance issue. Mr. Brennan saying the move is meant to scare other critics of the president into silence. Now John Brennan says he is considering legal action.
I think it was a clear signal to others who still have their security clearances, both in the government as well as outside, that if you cross him, if you speak out against him, he is going to use whatever tools he might have at his disposal to punish you. I have been contacted by a number of lawyers, and they have already given me their thoughts about the basis for a complaint, an injunction, to try to prevent him from doing this in the future.
And then a short time ago, President Trump tweeted this: "I hope John Brennan, the worst CIA director in our country's history, brings a lawsuit. It will then be very easy to get all of his records, texts, emails, and documents to show not only the poor job he did, but how he was involved with the Mueller-rigged witch hunt. He won't sue!" Exclamation point. Yesterday, two former Obama administration officials weighed in on all of this, saying that they do not agree with the president pulling Brennan's security clearance, but they also say Brennan is being too political. Watch it.
I worry that what he's saying now puts him in a much more politicized position. That said, I do worry about the fact that, one, that John is now in the political arena, and two, that at the same time, I don't agree with the president pulling it.
I think, John is sort of like a freight train, and he's going to say what's on his mind. John and his rhetoric have become, I think, an issue in and of itself.
Meanwhile, White House National Security Advisor John Bolton is suggesting Brennan misused classified information.
And I think, especially for senior intelligence officials, career intelligence officials who come out of the government, to keep that wall of separation between intelligence and policy. And I don't think Brennan has followed that. And, whether he actually used classified information, I think people will be able to determine. But I think that's a serious problem.
When you hear Democrats and otherwise neutral people politically coming out and saying that this John Brennan, former CIA director, is political, what do you make of it?
There have been so many folks who are decidedly anti-Trump who, on this particular case, say, he probably this was the right thing to do. It's pretty obvious, and it's so ironic that Brennan, after losing his security clearance, is on TV and every channel, every station, saying how people are going to be intimidated into silence. Well, it didn't work for him, right? I mean, come on, man. Now, if he did it from a bunker somewhere and he wrote a note and said, listen, I'm afraid for my life, but he's on every network out there now beyond the one that he's already contracted with, talking about being intimidated, that this is somehow a sledgehammer, but he's still complaining about it. No one took away his voice.
No, they give him a bigger one.
They gave him a bigger voice, yeah.
Well, and even the president, Katie, is saying that through his response to this, it probably has elevated John Brennan's profile beyond what he might have imagined.
Yeah, and over the weekend we heard a lot from those officials that we just played the sound from. But the big question is, there's something to be made, an argument to be made, that former heads of agencies should keep their security clearances to help the incoming administration. But you don't see John Brennan going out there and saying, I need my security clearance so that if the members of the CIA now, if Gina Haspel needs my help, that I can come in and help the country and give her advice on behalf of the experience that I have. It's all about John Brennan feeling like he no longer has access to politically sensitive information inside the CIA, which shouldn't be political at all. And so if you look at the way that he's framed his argument, he's trying to make it about free speech. It's not. Security clearances are a privilege, not a right. Exactly.
been talking.
And there is a broader question of whether the security clearance program overall needs to be reformed and how long these officials actually keep their clearances when they leave their position.
All right, I want to remind everybody of this. So John Brennan's CIA came under fire for snooping. Remember that, Kennedy, on computers used by Senate staffers helping compile his torture report back then. Senator Mark Udall.
And first denied it, by the way.
Right.
And then had to come clean about it.
So, yes. Well, and by deny, you mean lied.
Yeah.
Okay. Then Senator Mark Udall, Democrat from Colorado, was one of a couple of Democrats who were calling for the resignation of the man whose security clearance was just taken away. Democrats calling for his resignation because of what he did.
Yeah, and now there are other members of the intelligence community that you saw over the weekend raising an incredible protest against John Brennan and some of the claims he continues to make. I think John Bolton has to be a little careful, because if John Bolton is saying that Brennan reached into the intelligence cookie jar and pulled out some actionable information about Russian collusion, Bolton is basically, the national security advisor, is basically saying that there is something there to reach into. So he has to be careful about that, because the president has been so vociferous denying that there's been any collusion at all whatsoever. So I don't think that's a tree he wants to bark up. But you're absolutely right. Brennan is not at risk of losing his ability to speak freely.
No, he's still speaking.
I'm wondering why he's protesting, because, again, this is not someone who's talking about defending the importance of the intelligence community existing over years and years past their term. He just wants this power for himself. And the question is, why? It's as though all of these conspiracy theories are no longer theories, they're actuality.
I want to get into, though, what the president is saying, because he's right about the fact that then you have access to everything that he's had his hands on in terms of his emails, text messages. I don't know if a man who has a history with Democrats calling for his resignation might necessarily want that.
I don't know why he would, but, when he talks about using his voice, he's used his voice to lie quite a lot. And you guys just touched on one. I mean, he openly denied that he had gone in and hacked Senate intelligence computers. He later admitted that that was a lie, and he apologized. He lied about drone strikes killing civilians, saying they hadn't taken out a single civilian. He briefed President Obama to the opposite, and he appears to have lied when he said he had no idea who paid for the dossier. He either is lying about that, or he was horrible at his job because that was his group of people, and if they're out paying for things and lying to him about it, then he has no control over his group. And he said that they didn't depend on the dossier for anything important. That's either, a lie, or he was, again, a horrible director. So I think that all he's doing is highlighting what a liar he is.
But what about this flipping the switch, Charles? Because we've seen the president do this, and it can be very effective. If, in fact, everything you have is laid to bear, then what Melissa's talking about, if he lied to a former president, I mean, how much can they bring into evidence? Could you talk about deposing people that I know we're going down an if road, but he's opened the door on this by saying, I'm going to sue.
Yeah, and again,
both sides get discovery, I believe.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, we'll see how far that goes. He didn't seem, even as the words are tripping off of his lips, he didn't seem serious about it. To be quite frank with you, I don't think he believes that's going anywhere. But he's grasping for straws right now. And you go back, anyone can Google this stuff. Look at when the Washington Post wrote op-eds about maybe Obama should fire him. I mean, it's so he's been a bad actor. But I will say also something that a lot of folks aren't talking about when you see all these other people coming to his aid. How much is a security clearance worth in a private sector? If you go to work for a defense contractor and that's on your resume as opposed to not being on it, I think it's worth a lot of money.
Well, he's also not talking about national security. I think Democrats have to be very cautious looking at Brennan's tack, because he's trying to be a blowhard. He's trying to out-blowhard the president, and right now he's cratering. It's not working for him. So whoever is going to run for president in 2020 on the Democratic side, they have to be very mindful not to fall into this trap.
Oh, that's interesting.
The bigger issue, too, is we've seen a number of federal institutions get highly politicized, and there have been consequences for that in terms of the American people not having confidence in the agencies that are supposed to be serving them. The CIA is no exception. John Brennan, as his colleague said over the weekend, politicized this issue, has been extremely and overtly political, more than any other previous CIA director. And the bottom line is that the intelligence community is not supposed to be political, and he is making it political by not only saying these these things about treason towards the president, but also encouraging, as he did in the interview with NBC over the weekend, the people working for him, like Chief of Staff John Kelly, and saying, well, at some point you need to question who you're working for. I mean, that is the real problem. He is politicizing a group of people that are not supposed to be political in a time when our institutions need some
and that word treason has gotten him into a lot of trouble here recently. He's tried to walk that back, saying,
what's the punishment for treason?
Well, he said approaching treason.
Exactly.
I don't know. Is that like you're at the exit or you're approaching the exit? You're still going to get off? I don't know.
Who knows?
Anyway, all right, Fox News alert. We are on verdict watch in the Paul Manafort trial in Alexandria, Virginia, with the jury back for a third day. They are poring over that 18-count indictment. Federal prosecutors say Manafort failed to pay taxes on millions of dollars in hidden foreign income and that he lied on loan applications to obtain millions more to maintain a lavish lifestyle. The criminal trial is the first courtroom test of the Russia probe led by special counsel Robert Mueller, though the case does not involve allegations of Russian election interference. Peter Ducey has more from outside the U.S. District Courthouse in Alexandria. Peter.
Melissa, the safety of the jury was top of mind for Judge Ellis this morning, who reiterated that even at the end of this trial, quote, the names of the jurors will remain under seal. That is because Judge Ellis believes jurors would be subjected to threats since he's already been threatened because of his role presiding over this case. And the reason this issue bubbled up to the surface is that a handful of news outlets like CNN, the AP, and the New York Times all filed a motion asking for everything from the trial that is sealed to be unsealed, including those names. But it is not happening. There have been a pair of bench conferences so far today with members of the Mueller team and members of the Manafort defense team. And a source close to the Manafort defense told me today that 3 deliberation days after the jury didn't come back with a quick guilty verdict, they are starting to feel that the proceedings are taking on a feel of the final days of the 2016 election, where many pundits thought it would be an early night with a certain result and later wound up being surprised. Manafort sits for most of the day in solitary confinement here without a TV or even a magazine, just in case a verdict is announced. The Manafort side has been consistent since last week. They think the longer the jury has the case, the better it is for their client, because it demonstrates to them that the jury is very carefully reviewing the exhibits. And don't forget, they are navigating evidence without any kind of an index to show them which of the 400 exhibits correspond to which of the 18 charges. That is because the Mueller team never provided them with one. And just one other interesting thing that's going on inside the courtroom today, the jurors who have been sitting for most of the proceedings in the same exact seats every day came in this morning and they sat in different seats, which is very unusual. Nobody knows what it means, but since we only see them for a couple minutes a day, that's what people are talking about here outside of court.
Well, I mean, it is interesting if they've been in the same seat every day and all of a sudden they switch it up. I don't know.
We ought to do that here on Outnumbered.
Yeah, why not? All right, we will. Thanks for the suggestion, Peter Ducey. And of course, we are going to bring you, if anything comes into the courtroom, if we get a verdict, obviously, or there's any movement, we will bring you that news just as soon as it happens. In the meantime, far-left Democratic congressional candidate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez now facing a new controversy after she banned the media from her recent town hall events. Why she said she did it, and if her excuse holds water, we're going to debate that one. Plus, new reaction and another media battle after we are learning that Robert Mueller's team interviewed White House counsel Don McGahn, what the president is saying and the potential impact of all this.
Don McGahn was saying from the beginning, if you want to fire Mueller, I won't participate and I'm out of here. Don McGahn was giving the right advice and saying the right things to the president from the beginning.
All right, welcome back. There is a Fox News alert for you now. President Trump lashing out at the Mueller probe again today amid new reaction to the revelation that White House counsel Don McGahn has met extensively with the special counsel's team for questioning. The president tweeting, quote, disgraced and discredited Bob Mueller and his whole group of angry Democrat thugs spent over 30 hours with the White House counsel, only with my approval for purposes of transparency. Anybody needing that much time when they know there is no Russian collusion is just someone looking for trouble. The president yesterday also slamming a New York Times report about McGahn's reasoning for meeting with Mueller, tweeting, quote, "The failing New York Times wrote a story that made it seem like the White House counsel had turned on the president, when in fact, it is just the opposite, and the two fake reporters knew this. This is why the fake news media has become the enemy of the people. So bad for America." But the New York Times tweeting right back, "The New York Times stands behind the reporting of our Pulitzer Prize-winning reporters. Read the article that President Trump has been tweeting about this morning." In the meantime, reports now are that the president's legal team not quite sure exactly what McGahn told Mueller's team. But the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, says former Trump lawyer John Dowd informed him that McGahn was an excellent witness for the president. Watch.
I think that through John Dowd, we have a pretty good sense of it. And John Dowd yesterday said, I'll use his words rather than mine, that McGahn was a strong witness for the president. So I don't need to know much more about that.
Yeah.
Giuliani also accusing the Mueller team of leaking information about the interview, saying they're getting desperate because they don't have anything. Charles, brevity is the soul of wit. Has Don McGahn lost his wits? Because spending 30 hours with special counsel, it doesn't sound like the best idea.
It doesn't, but I think what President Trump said was interesting, and it's interesting also because the Journal put out a piece, and you know, the editorial board over there, they're not President Trump's best friends, and even on this score, though, they say, come on, I mean, you have to really waive executive privilege to let this go through.
Right.
That's an amazing sign. I mean, that's something you just simply do not give up or give away if you feel like you're guilty. But having said that, I think I speak to the entire American public. Please make it stop. Please get it over with today, please. Yeah. I mean, 30 hours there. It's just crazy. What's going on? When did we find the finish line on this thing?
But 30 hours with the special counsel, as McGahn did, may be a way to prevent the president from having to sit down for an interview. Because
you would think.
You're putting all these people on the White House counsel up to kind of stop the movement and the momentum to get to the president.
You think that'll happen then?
It might not, but that's their whole goal, is to stop, to get the special counsel enough information, as you've seen them say. We've given them enough information. We've given them hundreds of thousands of documents. Our people are talking to you. There's no reason why you need to sit down with the president. So that's probably why he was given the unlimited time frame. But it just feels like the president can't win. He opens up his White House counsel to an interview for the sake of transparency, as they say.
You mean and they can't win in the media.
Right. And then they automatically assume that he's turning on the president or being a bad witness.
But that's the thing, we don't know.
We don't know.
No one knows
what the outcome is.
What anybody said for those 30 hours. So I think it's kind of probably a little naive to think that just because you know a person, after hour 3, you probably have lost what you can count on at that point.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of talking. But just to further what you said, it's such an interesting point. So the whole point of wanting to sit down with the president is because he can get at things that you normally couldn't get at. But after 30 hours with one witness and you're talking with other people, you might be closer to that zone where the president isn't the only person who can answer certain questions.
Exactly.
That they've been asked and answered by other people, which then takes the onus off the president politically to have to sit down with Mueller because they can get this information elsewhere.
All right, but what happens? So let's say the best case scenario for the president, that even with this gigantic fishing expedition with Don McGahn alone, what if in the end Mueller really doesn't have anything? What does that do? I mean, he doesn't care. He's at the end of his career. But what does it do for special counsels moving forward?
I don't know. I mean, that's a great question. It does undermine the idea maybe that you need one. Although, having him go through all of this and verify that nothing happened, then it did serve its purpose because we did want to know what was the interference and where did it come from. I mean, I like to listen to Andy McCarthy, who we've had on the couch about these things, because he's a former prosecutor and you can never kind of predict what he's going to say. He doesn't seem to be terribly political one way or the other. And he talked about the idea that at this point, if you look at what has been the outcome and the reaction, whether it's Mueller laying off cases to other areas or what he's doing following Paul Manafort, which to me makes a lot of sense because Paul Manafort is someone who does have connections to Putin, Russians that are backed by the Kremlin. Yeah. But his response to all of this doesn't seem to be that the president has done anything if you look at the way he's acted on that. But he says the president should really stop tweeting because all he's doing is trash talking and antagonizing someone who's sitting there working on a case. And he said himself he'd be mad if it were him.
So 2 things for transparency. I mean, if the president wants this to end and for it to be over when it ends, because it could just linger when it ends.
Right.
But if it's really over, then he adds to the legitimacy of whatever the findings are by saying, look, I've allowed people to go out and talk. But remember what Senator Lindsey Graham said about a week or so ago. You have to let this play out with a whole lot of patience. I don't know if executive privilege is what you want, because you've gotten Governor Christie today saying, oh, he gave away too much, the president. But at least then when it ends, it's over.
Well, this sort of dovetails with what Melissa was saying, in a sense that if you discredit it every day and then they come out in your favor, have you actually discredited, and
does it linger after it ends?
But the bottom line is that it's at this point, there's still talk occasionally of getting Sessions to act, and I feel like we've run at least half of a marathon, and to run back to the finish line would be kind of ridiculous. Let's just get it over with and done. But
we're past the snack stand. We're in mile.
It feels like we're perpetuating a heartbreak hill. That's what it feels like.
Boston Marathon reference, well done. So let's talk a little bit about where we are right now. And, Charles brings up a really good point, because if, in fact, the president is exonerated, it sort of undermines the tweet. So what can happen conclusively that either makes complete sense of all the leaks and everything we've heard so far, or actually exonerates the president? I guess the point is, you say that at some point the president is hoping this ends when it ends. And it feels like this, for either side, could go on for much longer.
I just think it's been so politically charged on both sides, no matter what the outcome is. If Special Counsel Robert Mueller clears the president and there is no collusion found, then the left is going to go crazy, and they'll start doing what the right has been doing and saying that the investigation was never legitimate, that they didn't question all of the right people, et cetera, and the right will then try to move on. But I doubt that Democrats will let it go. The better president is let go.
If we were to find out that end before the midterm elections, Democrat supporters would be apoplectic. They want you to concentrate on the economy. I mean, it doesn't really help the Democrats either way.
Yeah, and the majority of people are sick of, as Charles said, are sick of the investigation. They want it to end, and they, quite frankly, don't really care about it.
Well, no one's sick of money. The Republican National Committee raking in a record amount in July, despite polls showing Democrats are more enthusiastic. And history saying the party in power usually loses in the midterms. So what could be behind the surge in the GOP's numbers? Plus, the U.S. Trade Office holding hearings on a proposed $200 billion series of tariffs on Chinese goods, whether this is getting China back to the negotiation table, and what this could mean for the midterms and for you.
China isn't really happy with what I'm doing.
The Republican National Committee continuing to rake in record fundraising hauls this election cycle, leaving Democrats lagging behind as the November midterms approach. This despite historic trends in recent polling seeming to favor Democrats. The RNC raising $14.2 million in July, the most ever for that month in a non-presidential year, and raising more this past July than it did in July of 2010 and 2014 combined, bringing its total haul for this midterm cycle to just more than $227 million. And all of this after transferring another $8 million split evenly between the National Republican Congressional and Senatorial committees. RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel touting the party's fundraising, saying, quote, "We've used our unprecedented grassroots support to build the biggest field program we've ever had to defend our House and Senate majorities. History might be against us, but we're making sure every voter knows we're the party of results. All the Democrats have is resistance." So, Charles, to our money man, is it all about the money, or are they going to need a little more than that?
Well, they'll need a little bit more, but you have to tip your hat to Ronna McDaniel and the job that she's done. It's really been remarkable. A lot of times you break those numbers down and you see the average and where it comes from and that kind of stuff. But overall, this has been a recurring theme. I also like when you look at the DNC's, their debt level, right? Because they usually have zero cash on hand and millions of dollars in debt. If I'm the RNC, that's my ad. By the way, do you want them to run the country the way they're running the DNC? So it's a good, hopeful thing, but I think she was honest with respect to the uphill climb that the party out of power always faces in these midterm elections. And it's going to be an amazing thing to watch just how powerful the Trump movement is, because the GOP is now Trump's party. Most of his candidates have won, and we've seen pockets of overwhelming enthusiasm in places we didn't think we'd see it. So November's going to be exciting.
I give money number two.
Yeah, I mean, I give the president a lot of credit because he's put a ton of elbow grease into going out there and helping candidates raise money and helping Republicans raise money. And I know there are people out there that will say, well, he loves doing that. He loves a crowd. Okay. I mean, he's still spending all the time and energy to go out there and help his party. I think it's also interesting when you look at the Democrats' numbers. So the individual candidates have done well. I mean, they've been able to raise money for themselves. What those overall numbers really tell you is that Democrats don't trust the larger party. And I think they're still suffering that hangover of knowing that the last presidential nomination on their side was completely rigged. Bernie Sanders didn't get a fair shake. And what happened with their larger party? And I think the DNC is really seeing that Democrats are enthused. They're willing to give the money to candidates. They don't trust the larger party. And that's a big problem going forward.
And it also has to do with how they spend the money, because as Hillary taught us, you can have all the money in the world and it doesn't equal victory if you don't spend it in the right way. And that's why, you know, both parties, they are raising money. It's just the DNC versus the RNC raising much more money. But the question is, how are you going to spend it? Right. And you know, a lot of these candidates, and Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez is one of the people who has shown, if you go and knock on doors and knock on thousands and thousands of doors and interface with voters, that is the work. And a lot of candidates in a digital age have gotten very, very lazy and think they can just win through social media alone. And that is not necessarily the case. And there's nothing that beats that. But you also need volunteers and support. And that's what these candidates are looking for the arts.
So the last time I interviewed Chairwoman McDaniel, she did share about that smaller share size of having many, many, many more people give you smaller donations. Right. Something that really Obama for America did very well. And Bernie Sanders too. I would say that it helps to have the opposite of what is being criticized so much about the rhetoric across the country right now, which is a lack of civility and negativity in many cases all over the place.
How much of this is impeachment, though?
But what I was going to say is the one thing that the Republicans are doing is they've galvanized behind that more positive message. And that is about the economy. And if they stick to that, what an anathema that is to everything else just about that you're hearing out there, particularly on the left, is they kind of, you know, go back and forth with each other about who they are.
I just want to make one quick point about the money. Money is not everything, as we know, but because the RNC is having to defend seats that maybe they weren't planning on, like in Ohio, as we saw recently, having a ton of extra cash on hand is going to be really important for them.
The U.S. Trade Representative's office opening a round of hearings today on the Trump administration's proposed $200 billion worth of tariffs on Chinese products imported to the U.S. The hearings come just as China's trade delegation is due back in Washington this week to resume talks after an impasse earlier this summer and ahead of another round of tariffs that are scheduled to kick in on Thursday. All this as U.S. tariffs are said to be hurting China's economy. One reason why the Chinese may be coming back to the negotiating table. Here's White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow at last week's cabinet meeting.
Their economy is just heading south. Retail sales, business investment is collapsing in China, according to the numbers. Industrial production has fallen and now is plateauing at a low level. People are selling the currency. There may be some manipulation, but mostly I think investors are moving out of China because they don't like the economy, and they're coming to the USA because they like our economy.
But the Trump administration is hearing from U.S. businesses, warning that these tariffs will force American consumers to pay more for everyday items. Charles Payne, what do you think?
You know, I think the tariffs are working, and I think it was unfortunately the only tool left that hadn't been used. General statescraft across the last several administrations did not work. China has these meetings. They nod their head. They say we'll meet again. In the meantime, they continue to rip off Americans. And listen, I've been watching this closely. I have to make people money in this market, and I'm looking at something really interesting here. It's not that Trump's trade tariffs are creating problems in China. It's revealing economic problems in China. Those are two distinct different things. They have some serious issues. Runaway debt, terrible credit. Their market, their Shenzhen, where the technology stocks trade, it peaked in 2015. It's down more than 50%.
Wow.
Big news this morning. They want to sell us back to Waldorf Astoria.
Right.
I mean, they are in really serious trouble, and we need to keep the pressure on. Also, something I'm working on, I want to do a special. All of this feigned support for the farmers, all of a sudden. I'm asking the American farmer, don't be a political tool out there for folks who really don't care about you, because, you know, net farm income peaked in 2013. It was $124 billion. The year before, 2016, before Trump came in, it was only $61 billion. It was already down 50% before the Trump administration even took over. So there are some serious issues here. And if we're going to use farmers as a political pawn, at least let's find out what's really hurting them.
What is the issue?
I don't know. I want to get out there and find out. I do know soybean prices and corn prices, they had already dropped precipitously long before Trump even became president. If we want to help out these folks that we're using now for political pawns, let's do it now.
Can I ask just a real quick question? I know we're off field a little bit here, but with the soybean farmers and everyone else, the president, though, working with the European Union to buy more of these products to kind of get us over the tariff hump.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Listen, the bottom line is that there's not enough soybeans laying around to feed 1.3 billion people. Yeah. So China will come back and they will start to order some of these soybeans. But there's a bigger, more problematic situation than that.
We also have the best soybeans.
Right. Well, not just that, but why is farm revenue down? And farm revenue is down. Why would Walmart, for instance, sell an imported apple from China
our government
in Washington State?
Stop subsidizing and picking winners and losers in agriculture. And, I think it's high time to stop doing that because a state-run economy certainly doesn't benefit.
Well, the state-run economy in China is not working.
Well, the other thing that's playing in here is that China's economy, as you said, is built on paper. It's a facade. For years, they've been building, and there's nobody buying hundreds of miles of empty buildings. China has developed a middle class in their country, but they're also still censoring them and keeping them under their fist. So once the middle class, they're not willing to complain now because things have been good.
Built on paper,
things have been good, but as soon as things start going south with the middle class in China, they're going to have a social problem domestically.
Okay, they're having a heart attack. We got to go.
All right.
President Trump launching some of his most heated attacks yet on Robert Mueller, comparing his probe to McCarthy-era tactics. Whether the president has a point or if this is going too far, we'll debate.
President Trump very busy on the Twitter machine this weekend, unloading on Robert Mueller in a series of tweets comparing the special counsel's Russia investigation to Senator Joseph McCarthy's infamous hunt in the 1950s for communists in the government. The president said in one tweet, "Study the late Joseph McCarthy because we are now in a period with Mueller and his gang that make Joseph McCarthy look like a baby. Rigged witch hunt." Former CIA and NSA director under President Bush, Michael Hayden, called the comparison absurd.
Joe McCarthy was a demagogue, and we haven't heard a public syllable from Bob Mueller in more than a year.
Well, that is true. We have not heard from him. What do you make of it?
We haven't heard from him, but we have heard from his investigation, and then people complain about leaks. But, I mean, obviously, right at this point, for me, and I haven't studied McCarthyism enough perhaps to be an expert, but it seems like a bridge too far. But I will say, and earlier in the show, we brought up the topic of these special counsels going forward. Do you ever put guardrails on them, or do you always throw them out there and they become the blob, right? Unstoppable. They go where you didn't want them to go in an effort to justify their existence in the first place. This is what I'm concerned about, is if he has nothing or he's not even close to getting something, how long does he keep this going? Yeah. How long does he push? Because he understands that even his silence can be politicized, and we head toward the midterm elections, it might be an issue.
It can be politicized, but it can't be misquoted.
Right, that's a good point.
Okay, that's why you stay silent. Yeah. You can't. So, Kennedy, just looking back, and we've been talking about the future of special counsels, do you think that there was this much concern over Kenneth Starr back in the day?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, certainly.
And so it certainly didn't change what happened going forward, is the example that I'm making here.
The name changed.
The name changed. Yeah. Right. But are we still in a situation where it does become the blob?
Yeah, I do. I think we're at a different time, and we're so politicized and divided that the other side is going to look at this and say, we don't want this to happen to us. And I think both sides would be incredibly wise to put parameters on these things, as far as the scope of investigation, but also the length of time and the amount of money, because it really can be endless. And in the end, are we going to get some big bombshell? Is there going to be some great revelation that is going to shake the presidency to its foundation and perhaps the country as well? Or, has this just been a big blob?
When you go back to the idea of McCarthyism, I think that the president's tweets have all gone too far and are not helping at this point, and maybe he should lay off on this particular subject. But when I hear Democrats, I heard a Democrat earlier today saying that, they expect to do well in the midterm elections unless the Russians interfere and hack again, and then they won't. That's where you get into this territory where it's really infuriating to American voters to say you're either, obviously, if you have a brain or you have any morality at all, you're going to vote with us. And if we don't win the outcome, it has to be because there was some magic and there's something happened.
Well,
and
there
was
is
some
magic in not having an economic message.
We didn't win, right? But it's that idea.
Right, a message. There's no
But
message.
it's dangerous
Or
to
being
the Democrats because they're out there and they're saying these things that really undermine the will of the voter and make voters feel like, oh, so if I don't agree with you, you're morally superior. I'm a bad person if I don't agree with you, or I'm stupid, or I'm fooled by the Russians.
Yeah, it wasn't a rejection of Hillary Clinton. It wasn't a rejection of Democrat policies or government or whatever's corruption, whatever's going on. It has to be because someone else, in this case, the Russians interfering, is exactly why Democrats are losing, which then gives them an excuse not to come up with an actual plan. But this is another example of why special counsels are always, people should be very wary of them. When they are appointed, it is an indictment of the current system not working. That's why the special calls for second special counsels on the Robert Mueller special counsel have been interesting considering the criticisms of this one. There's still so much that we don't know. And the most important thing that has been the consequence of this is the country tearing each other apart because it continues to drag on and going back to exactly what you said.
And don't forget
it's
what
either
we're
the
watching
Russians
today.
or the Americans, choose one.
Paul Manafort, the verdict. If for some reason there is a hung jury and there is enough cause there for Robert Mueller to take another bite at the apple, that's yet another vein of the investigation where you spend more money. I'm just using it as a potential example. We'll move on. With President Trump under constant fire for his relationship with the media, there is new heat on the Democratic Party's rising progressive star, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She barred...
Welcome back. Far-left Democratic congressional candidate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez facing criticism for barring the media from two of her town hall campaign events. The 28-year-old self-proclaimed socialist calls it a non-story and defends her decision, saying, quote, it was designed to protect and invite vulnerable populations to public discourse, immigrants, victims of domestic abuse, and so on. We indicated previously that the event would be closed to the press. Future ones are open. A Washington Examiner correspondent tweeting, quote, not sure this holds up. Press banned to make voters more comfortable, except anyone could have walked in as long as they claimed to be a future constituent, unless all attendees had their backgrounds vetted, which means it wasn't open to the public. And this, of course, as the president regularly faces criticism for his treatment of the press. Say what you will about the president's fire and fury against the press. At least he invites them to events. I don't know what it is about Democrats where they have to pen them off, but it almost seems as though she's coming up with a laundry list of excuses because several of her recent press appearances have not gone so well for her.
She has she has stepped in it so many times, and it's unfortunate. And then she went on to say, we have a high degree of immigrants in my district, and they're afraid of the press. Are you kidding me? That's who you go to if you're really worried. But I think she was only protecting one person, and that was her, because she can't get her act together. She can't articulate her own message. She's powerful. She's dynamic. But the idea that she's trying to put forth socialism, she has not been able, when she has to frame it in a way that it makes sense, she hasn't been able to accomplish that.
Yeah. And, she says that 50% of the community are immigrants, but at the same time doesn't want to let anyone in to meet who these people are, which signals to me that they're actually illegal immigrants and that they are harboring them and they don't want the press to expose that they're here illegally.
That's what she wants you to say. That's the trap you're falling into. I think that it's obviously just an excuse. She's throwing it out there, but it's so cheap to use that. It's so tawdry to say, I'm trying to protect victims of abuse because she can't stand up to the press. It does does remind me a little bit. Remember how Hillary Clinton wouldn't come to the front of the rope line and she wouldn't answer questions and she wouldn't see the press and she was staying 100 feet back for a while? I think that she's taking a page out of Hillary's book.
I can't believe the press is catcalling her, demanding that they go into her events that are open to the public. I can't believe they would do that.
You can't say it's open to the public and not allow the press inside. That's not open to the public.
I just belong to I was on the board of a charter school there in the South Bronx, and over half the students were recent immigrants from Africa. And they're not political at all. And anytime they can get visibility for their plight, how hard it was for them to get to this country, and what they're trying to achieve, they're actually the personification of why we're a great country in the first place. Andrew Cuomo should probably go sometime and find out, because she should have let the press in to see how legal immigration, and how people wanting to come to this country makes us great.
That's a great point. If the country's never been great, then why do so many people want to come here to realize their dreams? And, you also raise a great point, which if you have so many people who are underserved by their government, don't you think they would want to tell their story?
Right.
She also threw in one more, that a lot of the people at this event had medical issues.
Well, I'm just curious if all the defenders of the media being under attack from Trump are going to attack her the same way that they've been attacking him.
No.
Probably not.
More outnumbered in just a moment.